Daniel, you have a story for the people. What is going on?
Well, this might be the most depressing story of the day, but it is
no.
the end of the show, so you're welcome. Okay, so the fallout from the coronavirus spread that has killed more than 83,000 people and wreaked havoc on the economies around the world could push 500 million people into poverty. So this is huge. This is enormous. This is what we're talking about when we are asking what level is the cure and the disease? How does that work out? Well, the economic crisis that is rapidly unfolding is deeper than the 2008 global financial crisis. The report found the estimates show that, regardless of the scenario, global poverty could increase for the first time since 1990. It said, adding that this could throw some countries back into poverty levels last seen some 3 decades ago. The report authors played through a number of scenarios, taking into account the World Bank's various poverty lines, from extreme poverty, defined as living on $1.90 a day or less, and higher poverty lines of living, which is less than $5.50 a day. So remember those two numbers. It's $1.90 for extreme and high levels for $5.50. Under the most serious scenario, a 20% constriction in income, the number of people living in extreme poverty would rise by 434 million people to 922 million worldwide. The same scenario, this is the one that blew my mind. The same scenario would see the number of people living below the $5.50 mark to rise by 548 million people to 4 billion. Women are at more risk than men, as they are more likely to work in the informal economy with little or no employment rights. So there you have it. There's, we were talking a little bit about the show before this, but there was good news on extreme poverty that has been developing in the last 30 years, right around the 90 period when that became a targeted vector. Because, in capitalism, people aren't worth anything unless they're making money. So why not make some people make a little more money? And that seems reasonable. However, it's basically 500 million people are going to move from that high level to extreme, more or less, and then 500 million more are going to move from outside to that. And this is affecting more people than there are people living, perhaps even in China.
So again, looking at this crisis, we've been talking about this even on the radio days for Hard Lens Media. I just have to keep bringing it up because a lot of our stories were on how we are long overdue for an economic collapse, not a recession, but a true Great Depression, the likes of which we have never seen. This one's going to probably make the one that looked like in the 1930s seem like a walk in the park at this point, because we are in such a globalized society. And with so many people unemployed, be prepared to see more suicides and deaths and starvation. And yes, even escalated military conflict as well, because people are going to be put in a desperate situation. When you have desperate people, they're going to react in an irrational way. This is why we needed to have massive overhaul and regulation over our stock markets, over our economy, so that these large corporations just couldn't get away with this. But because of the system that we have, because of globalization, because of neoliberalism and how it's impacted Western democracy, we are going to see a lot of people basically being left holding the bag, while these corporations worldwide are just walking away with everything. And here in the United States, I can guarantee this, that a majority of the people in poverty will, at least in that statistic data, will probably be here in the United States, because again, we don't have social safety nets.
There are actually a lot of different, because poverty rate in the United States is actually under $30 per day. So yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it that way, yes, that probably will increase a great amount. Mm-hmm. But as far as living on $1.90 to $5 per day, not so much. Like the thing that intrigues me about the entirety of this is, well, two different things really. First of all, as Daniel was saying, and I had actually looked up the stats, from 1990 to 2011, the extreme poverty rate, the folks living below $1.90 per day, was 43% in 1990, dropped to 21% in 2011. So it actually was a targeted. They were trying to reduce that. And yeah, there are nefarious motives, obviously. Like if you're making money, you're spending money, everybody's great, trickle down, yada, yada, yada. That regardless, that was greatly reduced. I guess my other thought on that though is, so let's actually look at this in a way of, let's pretend we did absolutely nothing. Let's pretend that the virus just decided to go unchecked. We decided, oh, let's just ignore it because the cure, in fact, is worse than the disease. So I did some like back of the envelope math. Global infection rate. Let's pretend that 60% of the entirety of the world got this disease in some way. That means 4,665,000,000 and change. Of those, let's say that the death rate is 2%, because I think that's one of the going death rates right now. Mm-hmm. So you have a death of 93,300,000 some odd. 93 million some odd. That's just the people dying from the virus, not the people who are dying because they can't get into the hospital from all of the other things that would normally be prevented. And I'm not sure that if global capitalism has in fact lowered that poverty rate, that saying that that's going to be the thing that like kills us all is the right way to go with that. But my other question is, so, and this is like a very, very age-old moral dilemma, like, do you save the few at the expense of the many? Do you save the many at the expense of the few? What kind of math do you want to do on this? Because when it comes down to it, like, this whole thing just sucks, regardless of who you want to blame or how you look at it. This whole thing just sucks.
Yeah. And so on that note, I think that's a fair point. So the way I look at it as the point that we're at, there's only really one path, and that's sort of to do what we're doing. And it's sort of like this is the inevitability of a global pandemic. Now, I would argue, and this is sort of where my point of view has been on from the beginning with coronavirus, is that we failed before it even started, because we were so like, it just take stockpiling. We don't stockpile things anymore. Everything about the modern logistics of the world is, I want the thing in my store the second that someone wants to buy it, and not a second sooner, not a second later. So no one's stocked up on anything. So you take, for example, let's just assume for a second that that anti-malarial medication, let's just pretend that it turns out to be rather effective and the numbers will prove it out. I have no idea. Let's just say for a second. Well, wouldn't it be nice? Because right now there's barely any of it that exists, and the production ability to make it is basically nothing. And because governments of the world have moved in the way that we do capitalism now, in a different universe with a different system that was perhaps more socialist in nature, you would expect as a benefit of that system that we would have stockpiles of things, or we would have stockpiles of oxygen tanks or stockpiles of ventilators, because someone would go, hey, a pandemic is a thing that happens on this planet. We should at least be prepared. Maybe we can't stop it. Maybe we won't be able to. Maybe we don't have a vaccine or a drug that's going to be ready, but maybe we get those building blocks set up on time. Maybe we really make sure, well, if it's this thing or it's this thing, we probably need oxygen. We probably need ventilators. We probably need a dozen other things that have nothing to do with this pandemic, but might be for another pandemic. But there were no stockpiles set up. There were no food stores. Like right now, the federal government just in the U.S. is like, how do we give people money? Do we not give people money? We don't want to give. We're going to give the corporations money, but maybe one thing they could do is like what they're doing in Europe, where they're giving people, like in Canada, even $2,000 a month right away. They're like, okay, we know that people need money. We have to keep the economy going somehow. Give them money, trickle up, trickle up, trickle up, and they're doing that. That's something that's helping people. Europe is having similar things where they're paying people near or at the amount of their wages would be. Whereas in America, we're like, yeah, maybe we'll give them like $1,200 of their own money sooner.
One time.
And that's it. I look at it just from like, we already failed. The path that we're on right now is inevitable, but we already failed before it started because we never globally thought to prepare for something like this that is, a huge deal to the world economy, that we should have prepared for, but we were too busy thinking our logistics were the tits.
I think another issue too, and this has to do with human nature, is that we are slow to react to any form of disaster or any change into our environment until it's too little, too late. I mean, that's been human history. That's been following us since the beginning of times, ever since we created our first civilizations. Humans are always unprepared, even though now we have a technology at our disposal where we can make so much, but we don't have enough right now. And this is a lesson going forward on how we need to prepare as a species. But I see Jerome and Mark, they want to add in some comments real quick too.
Maybe another a kind of an apt but not quite accurate example of what I'm trying to say is Operation Barbarossa in World War II. Maybe would have been helpful for Stalin to put up some defenses before the Nazis started rolling tanks into their country. That's sort of what I'm saying. And then once you get in, you're going to get Russia gets out of it. We're going to get out of this pandemic, but we just have a lot more loss of life and infrastructure than we would have otherwise.
Yeah, the only thing I really want to add into here is, there's a lot of ways to look at this. Obviously, preparation, we can't prepare for everything, right? We can't stockpile everything. I understand that, but there was a chance for us to prepare for some things, for just thinking that things are going to happen eventually. Something is going to and Daniel kind of has a point. We're in that kind of society where it's like we need it right now, and if we don't need it, we don't need it here, sitting here at that moment. The thing is, now that it's happening, I just, in the way I look at it, is we're not handling it properly. Our country is not handling it properly. There are a lot of things that we could be helping people out with, and we're not doing that because profit still.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's how I feel about it.
Right. One other thing too, and that is when we walk out of this crisis, we're going to have to treat, this new world. It's going to be a whole new playing field, and we need to set it in stone that we need to prepare for everything, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a climate disaster, an asteroid hitting the planet, an invasion. I don't know whatever it looks like, but we need to be prepared to feed and provide the people for necessary resources and economic relief. Because go ahead, Mark.
Well, I guess the word "we" that we keep using, are we talking about the United States? Because I think that there's two kind of conversations going on right here. You're right. This government is reacting very poorly to this. The article that we were starting on talks about a $2.5 trillion stimulus package would be needed to because we're not talking, this article is not talking about the United States falling into abject poverty. It's talking about the globe. Mm-hmm. So my question is the we that we're talking about preparing, the we that we're talking
all of us. I would say all humanity.
Does that involve the UN? Does that involve, because again, then you get the concept of, do we want globalism? Do we not want globalism? How do we centrally locate and prepare for this? Because there is no we right now. There's just a us and them, and it's kind of been the politics of the last 10 years. But it seems like we've gotten further and further away from a we and more closer to an us.
So I would say that I could give you all the examples. I'm going to stick with the most restrictive and just say the United States, because effectively, for but a few countries, the world is our colony, effectively, by the way that the U.S. because of what happened after World War II and the Cold War. And if you look at the map of the Cold War, I look at that as that's the U.S.'s colonies. Everything that is in blue on that map is a U.S. colony in some way, shape, or form. Either it's closer to an ally, like countries in Europe, but we still look at them on colonies. And so the effect of that is that people follow our lead on just about everything we do. And if the United States was like, we're going to shore up and make sure we have stockpiles of everything that we need, I bet you Europe would go, you know what? We're also going to do the same thing. And I bet that South America would go, you know what? That's probably not a bad idea. Russia would go, yeah, we're going to do that. We're going to do it better than the U.S. And China's like, we're also going to try and do that better than the U.S. But the U.S., I mean, we're falling apart as a leader. We're in a weird spot where we might exist, or I think we will exist for the first time in 2,000 years, where the epicenter of the planet is in Asia and moves away from Europe and America. Yeah, and it's everything's in flux. But but right now the U.S. had the power 20, 30 years ago to make a policy of, we're going to be prepared for many contingencies, and we're going to have these giant government warehouses that we're going to make sure is maintained, and yada yada yada. But as I said, the problem is the way that we do capitalism it's like if you had like a dog or something, and you want it to be a racing dog, you're cut off every part of that dog that is not absolutely required for the task at hand and keeping it alive. We will feed it intravenously. It doesn't need a stomach. It doesn't need all these things. It just needs the bare minimum, and we will feed it as exactly what it needs on time so that it can be the fastest race. That's how we set things up. We're set up. It's like a manager at any business. You can have a terrible manager that looks like he's doing good on paper when the company's doing well. And that's true with just about any circumstance. The real thing you need to know is what happens when things don't go well, and we are terrible at managing.
But again, with the real issue too, the reason why I'm saying maybe globally us as a species is because look, we're looking at a scenario where the United States will not be a global leader. I mean, right now we have the highest amount of cases of people being infected with COVID-19, and then also too, our economy is falling apart. We don't have social safety nets. So what I mean by we is like this whole new world. Be prepared for the United States not to be a global leader. I know it's a controversial statement, but that's the truth. So collectively, us humans as a species, I'm not calling for a united Earth. I mean, come on, we'll never see that in our lifetime. Neither will our great grandchildren. Okay, but what I'm saying is that collectively, as a species, we need to come up with an international doctrine so that every single country is prepared for this and that we are working together to make sure we avoid another crisis like this. Now, is everything going to be perfect? No. But seeing as how the whole world was basically gut checked by COVID-19 and now this coming Great Depression that we will be living through, the lessons need to be learned from this so this doesn't happen again. And not to mention, let's add on to this disaster of economic collapse and COVID-19 with the disaster of climate change. It will forever impact us as a species, and the only way we can do this is by pushing forward.